Shalom Aleichem, my dear friends, good Yom Tov. You know, today is Pesach Sheni. You probably noticed with all the matzah downstairs.
Did you have? Do you eat matzah?
Of course. Had last night, had today, probably have a little bit more later, before sunset. It's a good thing. Have matzah on Pesach Sheni. Ritz Hashem will speak about it a little bit today. We're learning a Torah from Ibn Nachman, which is about how to get our prayers answered. How do we achieve that state of having our prayers answered? So we said we have to look at the Seichel Shebachol Davar, investigate and find the God point in everything. We said that God point is something called Chachma. It's a big light. It's the point of wisdom in everything. We said that point, though, is such a bright light. It's not always easy to see. It's such a big light that sometimes it could overwhelm us. So we need a way to receive that light. And that light is like a sun. It's represented by Yaakov. And all the analogies we've spoken about in previous shiurim. So we need something called the moon. And the moon is that ability to take the light of the sun and to reflect that great light. And to make that light accessible for us. The moonlight. The beauty of the moon. We said that moon represents Malchus, represents the letter Nun. And when we have a Ches, which is the big light and everything, the Chias, and the Nun, we get Chayin. And when we can restore that Chayin, we can restore our grace, and the Skambal and Kolat Tfilis, and all of our prayers will be answered. Because if you want somebody to do something for you, but you don't find favor in their eyes, then why would they want to do that thing for you? And of course, we're not giving any anthropomorphic or anthropomorphization on God. Anthropomorphization to God. Something like that, you know. We all understand that God is somehow has intrinsic emotions, or God is a hand and an arm. We know that that's not true. It's all allegorical. It's all a mashal. So from our perspective, though, we can understand how there's such a thing, that if Hashem gives us this analogy, that if we don't find favor in somebody else's eyes, they don't want to necessarily do something for us. So Hashem uses that for us, that the reason He's not giving us the things that we want is because we're lacking that grace. Because we pushed away the Seichel Shebachol Davar. We're not finding that grace. We're not finding that. We said even though if it's hard to find the Ches, you go to the Nun. And yesterday we spoke about kingship. What does it mean to be a king? A real Torah king. We explained that it's different than the way that the world sees kingship. The way the world sees kingship is some big macho guy or something. It's like, you know, King Edward the 17th. He's like eating Abram and Achai, like a limb off a live animal, and big goblets of beer, and ladies are fanning him with giant leaves, and he's just sitting on his throne and commanding the nation what to do. And he may or may not be a totally horrible person. And even if he has some righteous ability, he takes that and it's easy for him to abuse that power because he's the final word. So if it fits his interests, then it works. Whereas the Torah king has nothing. He's nothing to himself. He's completely hollowed himself out. He's made himself totally nullified. To whose will? The one and only will. The will of the Lord. And therefore every motion that he does is like a moon. The moon reflects so beautifully the light from the sun. And that's how we can receive that big light from the Ches and get Chaim. Now we're about to begin Esav. You guys ready for Esav?
Yes.
Aval mi she'einu mekasher atzmai, ela seichel ve'achachma ve'achish shebechol davar. If a person says, I don't want to see the light in every single thing. I don't want God to be guiding my every single moment and part of my life, even if I can't receive that. And I'm really just going to get it from the Nun. I'm going to reflect it. But he says, I don't even believe that there is such a light. I don't believe there's a point called the before and everything. And we said the Bechor is the point of creation of everything. It's all coming out of a point called God. And a person says, I deny that reality. The world is just happenstance. I don't find any meaning in the things that happen to me. He completely denies that reality. So he's what we call Zeh B'chenas Esav. He has allowed the power of Esav to overtake him. Of course, Esav was the brother of Yaakov. Was Esav a good guy? He might have been one of the most evil people of all time. Was Esav smart? Oh, was he ever? It says he was even smarter than Yaakov. He was better at learning than Yaakov. He would ask his father all sorts of complicated questions in halacha to make himself look like he was a big Talmud Chacham, but in fact he was a nobody. He was nothing. He knew a lot, but it never went into his heart. It never became a relationship. The way my Rebbe says it was a big iPod. He had all the Torah in his head, it had nothing in his heart. It never affected who he was as a person. He didn't believe that the Torah and that God is in the Torah. He thought it's, this is what you do to get smart. Like people learn Gemara. They know the Jews, they have this secret weapon called Talmud. So we're going to translate it into all sorts of languages and we're going to learn the Talmud. And we'll learn their secrets. And we'll get into good law schools. Because we know how logic works. But is that why Hashem gave us the Torah on Mount Sinai? For mental gymnastics and acrobatics? Just to show that I can juggle 15 different balls of he said this and then he said this and then there's a contrary, he counters that and he brings a proof and a proof against that and you're holding on to this and then we forget to be shining what Taisus has to say. And all of a sudden you're holding on to a giant, you're 50 steps into 3D chess. Is that what it's all about? Or is that every single letter of Torah is being given to me from Hashem right now? And I'm fusing myself into the Noisein HaTorah, the one who's giving the Torah. There's a relationship, it's alive right now. So Esav cuts off that relationship. He says Hashem can't be found in everything. And therefore he denies that there's a God point in everything. Now what was interesting about Esav? He was going to get the blessing of the firstborn. But what did he do with that blessing? He sold it for a the Odama Odama. Haliteini Nomana Odama. Give me some of that red stuff. Down the hatchet. Just put it down the hatchet. I mentioned in a previous class he didn't do any chewing. It was just total physical insertion without processing that there's any godliness in it. That's the idea. He didn't chew it. It just says, dump it down my throat. Not for now, we'll talk about later. It's more advanced. The idea of what it means Kabbalistically to chew something. Which, by the way, our generation is a horrible time chewing. We literally are just, we get a F. That's fail, right? We fail in chewing. We're just eating so fast, where the secrets of the universe are around chewing. Because chewing represents the idea of taking something and breaking it down to the essential point of it. Which, by the way, digests much better that way. That's obvious. But when I just take something in without processing it and chewing it, there's no digestion. There's no getting to the inner point of it. You're not breaking it down to the inner point. So Esav denied that there's an inner point in something. He said, just insert physicality into me because that's all I see. Even his name Esav comes from the language Asui. He's already finished. When he came out, you know what he looked like? He was a hairy dude, red hair. Could you imagine? Long hair, long beard, hairy everywhere. And they said he's finished. He's baked. He's already done. He doesn't have to do anything. He has no more spiritual growth. Physicalness is what there is. And that's it. And Yaakov is always looking, what's the God point in everything? Yeah.
So how come he gets the credit for it to the...
So there he had this was his mitzvah, it's true, that he gave on a simple level, everything to Yitzchak. He would change his clothes into royal garments. He dressed up like a king to serve his father. And for that, he has reward. He has reward. Because no mitzvah is not rewarded. A person does a mitzvah, they're given reward. And he also knew that Yitzchak believed in him. He felt that from his father, and he wanted to show that appreciation. He could have come back. Him and Yaakov could have been this team to take over the whole world and build God a kingdom here. Could you imagine the power of Esav, which is the power of Edom, that Western world power, would take all that energy and direct that towards building God a palace down here? Could you imagine? That's what we're working on. To take that sheer force, the creativity of it, could you imagine if Hollywood flipped their entire hashkafa into, we need to bring authentic God consciousness into the world. And they took that and they just spread that to the world with all the resources, all the creativity. Could you imagine what that would do? All the social media, everything is directed to power. It's powerful over there. And just directed it towards God consciousness. And all the inappropriate anti-Torah content was completely removed. Which, by the way, when Mashiach comes, that's what it's going to look like. A person's going to go on the website, he's going to Google. There's only going to be one thing. God. It's the only thing. Okay, so let's see. We're going to talk about this part of Torah, this part of Torah, this part of Torah. Everything else is going to be gone. There's going to be no other focus at all. So you guys are ahead of the curve. You're already getting ready for what's coming. But all the world and all the resources and all the energy of the world is going to go for one thing and one thing only. Bringing God consciousness into the world. And Esav has those muscles to do that. He's a mover. He's big. So imagine you have that type of a person completely teamed up with Yaakov, who was on the level of total spiritual clarity, the Seif Shabbat Davar, that total light, and they worked together. You would have an everlasting base. That's called Mashiach. But Esav went off the derech. He left and he denied the ches. He denied the Seif Shabbat Davar. And what happens? What did the Rebbe say? The Yivez Esav Esabachayra. He gave up the firstborn. He pushed that away. He was mavaze it. He sold it for physical life. The Hainu Aseichel Kenir El Bechinas. Oh, this is such a beautiful line. Look at what Nachman does. Quoting a verse from the Proverbs. Lo yachpoitz ksil b'tvuna. The ksil is a fool. The fool does not truly want to understand life. A real fool, when you try to have an honest conversation with them about what's the purpose of life, have you thought about that recently? Why are you spending all your days? Like the Gemara says, the Babylonians, those fools, the Tipshin, the foolish Babylonians, then what do? They eat bread in order to have enough energy to go to the fields and plant more bread, that there should be bread that will grow, in order that they can eat that bread, to have enough energy to go and plant more bread, in order the bread will grow, and then they'll have bread to eat, in order they have energy to plant more bread. And if you say to you, foolish Babylonians, why? What are you doing this for? I say, what do you mean? I need energy to plant more bread. What's the question? I say, you fools! You ever think about why you're here? So the ksil, the fool, doesn't actually really want to understand what life's all about. And these people might be very intelligent people. In fact, a lot of the people, if you find in universities, you might ask them. They're very intelligent. But if you say to them, what's the purpose of life? Why are we here? They say, that's like, we don't know the answer. I know that's like fluffy stuff. Is there anything more real than that? More real than knowing why you're here? Besides the fact that logic dictates that there's such a rational basis, an overwhelmingly rational basis, that the spiritual reality is much more real than the physical reality, as Aristotle showed us. But the fool doesn't want to hear that. The fool doesn't really want to know the truth. He's happy in his eating my bread, my 9 to 5, because that can be very threatening. It can be very threatening. Meaning my whole life I've just been living a lie. But you have to help that person. You have to help that person. We don't want them to go into the world of the souls after 120 years and be faced with, oh, so I didn't do anything what the creator of the world wanted me to do. I was so involved in my little world. But the last half of the verse says, he doesn't want to truly understand. What does the fool want? Ki im bis galus liboy. All he wants is what his heart just says to do. Whatever the heart says and feels, if it feels good, I do it. But somebody has an honest conversation with you about why you're here. And maybe it's actually a little bit more of a challenging conversation. He already gets all like defensive. That's the fool. So we need a language to help those people, which is a lot of humanity. To have honest, rational conversations with love, with humanity. Why are we here? Why are we here? To help fix Esav. And this is the quality called the evil kingdom. The evil kingdom is just totally involved in its own kingdom, never looking for the point inside of everything that God is screaming out and saying, I'm here. This is called the moon on the dark side. There's always the side of holiness and the side of unholiness. So if you have the moon reflecting the light of the sun on the side of holiness, you have another type of a moon, which we'll talk more about tomorrow. But the moon is going to be very, very embarrassed. It's going to be a tremendous, that it spent its whole life pushing away the inner point, the inner meaning of everything. Rabbi Nachman gives a very powerful mashal of this. He says, you have a man and he's standing in front of a beautiful mountain. Gorgeous. And then he's standing beside his friend and he says, Yid, do you see the beautiful Alps in front of you? They're gorgeous. And the friend says, no, I don't see anything. He said, no, look over there. Said, I don't see anything. Why doesn't he see anything? Rav Nachman says, because he has a coin on the tip of his nose. So all he sees is this coin. He said, no, right there. Don't you see it? But the coin is right on his nose. So all he sees is this little coin. He spent his whole life looking at a little coin, chasing this coin. So the mountain says, there's a big light called God in the world. It's much bigger than your coin, but if your coin is right there, you put it right up, where you see nothing else with this coin, it can block out something so big. Right? And people take these pictures, they're very cute actually. They take a picture and the guy's like holding the sun, the guy's at setting. So puts his fingers like that, like this, like hold, right? It's cool. Ke'ilu, like look, that you could cover up the whole thing with one little coin, if that's your perspective. It's all a matter of perspective. So the fool, Esav is a fool. All he sees the little coin in front of him. It's sitting on his nose, and he denies the bigger reality of God. That's called the evil kingdom of Esav. And if a person gives himself to that kingdom, then he misses everything. And we mentioned that kingdom, Malchus, means Emunah. Kingdom is a code word for Emunah. For Emunah. Because if we can't get the light of the sun, at least we have the light of the moon, which says, I have a Shulchan Aruch, I have a Shem, that I know that I believe in you and I trust you. And then all the light will come in. We'll talk more tomorrow about what that evil kingdom represents, the kingdom of Esav. We should be Zocher. We didn't quite get the Pesach Sheni, the Siyat Deshmaya. But you should know this is the day. All the gates are still open for 7 days. It's much a longer conversation. But it says in the Zohar that you have 7 more days to just get the job done. But the gates in heaven are open, and anybody who wants to come back in Shuvah, you have 7 days right now before the gates close, and you're not able to see the bride anymore. I'm talking allegorical right now. There's a certain bride, she's going to be getting ready for Kabbalah Satayra, the bride of Shavuos, You have 7 days to go and see her and to be with her. And the gates are open for tshuva right now, and you have to scream out and say, even if I missed the last 30 days, even if I haven't done that much, and maybe I wasn't even pure on the day of Passover, Lamani Gara, I don't want to miss my opportunity. I want to go in now for that relationship. I want it. This is the day of deep, deep will, of listening to the Hirhurim, that inner voice that's calling you and saying, come back through the gates. And you want to hear this voice and you want to reciprocate and say, yes, I want to come back through those gates to go see the bride. You should be Zeicha to go to the bride, Knesset Yisrael, to go to the Shechina Kedosha, and to bring Hashem's divine presence with the Beis HaMikdash in here of Yemenu. Amen. Have a wonderful day, Chaver. Good Yom.